My name's Erwin, and this is the Poetry Lighthouse. In today's episode, I had the pleasure to interview the book cover designer Jamie Keenan, who will talk about his experience and creative process.
Awesome. So we were talking about, we finished talking about the Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, the cover that you did, which pretty brilliant. I really liked it.
Thank you.
And the other cover that you did that was very striking for me the first time I saw it was the one called Otherwise Pandemonium. It's pretty interesting because it looks like a bit frightening and mysterious. I would say even a little bit sinister. So could you tell us how what was the relation with the cover and the story and how you came up with the idea?
You've really described it perfectly. It's about a boy who discovers an old VHS kind of video recorder, and he just for fun he kind of rigs it up to an old TV and starts to watch videos, and then he starts to realize that it's playing news programs, and he assumes it's news programs that are from the past. And then he realizes that it's actually playing news programs from the future. And it's not nice. It's all kind of wars and violence and death and things. So I was sitting on a train on my way back from work one night after finishing. It's very kind of short. And I wanted to do something with those old kind of VHS cassettes. Like these two kind of circles in a black square. And I just, what I do an awful lot with covers is I've got two things and I try and find some kind of link between them. So it was about a boy and it was about a VHS tape. And I was doing some scribbles on the train thinking, how can I get these two things to join together? And then just as the train came into my station, I suddenly twigged that I could pull the tape out of it and and form like a portrait. So I did that, and just by accident, it formed this, as you say, this boy looks he not only looks like a boy, but he looks kind of horrified and startled and stuff.
Yeah.
And I did that without I just did it in one go and it just worked. And I'm sure that if I'd done loads of research and got drawings of, a boy looking shocked, I'd never have captured it. It was just a fluke. So, and that was it really. And then, as I was saying before about, what should the typography look like? And that kind of dictated it. So once I had that image, I realized that the type should really be like a sticker that you'd get on one of those VHS things. And the type should be scrolled on. And that was it really. It all just sort of came from that initial idea of just something as boring as a kind of VHS tape. And that's it really. It quite often it's not, I look back and I sort of think a cover had an idea, but it's not really one idea. It's a series of 6 or 7 kind of less impressive ideas, just observations almost. So it's a book about a VHS. So then that becomes a VHS flat on. So that then becomes a portrait. And then that informs it's a label, and the label tells you, and in that case, the type should be this. So it's one small idea. And from that, it's a series of jumps that creates where everything else goes, if you see what I mean. So, so it's not really thinking that I could never sort of sit and think and come up with this one amazing idea. Instead, I come up with one fairly kind of simple, basic half idea, but then it just keep going with that. And then that it all flows from there really.
Sometimes I guess it happens in the most unexpected times, right? Sometimes you're
always
cooking or doing something, and sometimes it comes up.
Yeah, it's always when you're either doing nothing or you're doing something else. It's not. I read something the other day that I think is great, and it said the worst time to come up with an idea is when you really need one. And it's true. You can't sort of think, right, I need an idea now, because it doesn't work like that. It works when you're having a shower, or you're swimming, or you're on the bus, or you go for a run, or you almost need to be thinking, but only half thinking about it. Because if you try too hard, it's terrible.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
quite interesting. I thought you had put so much thinking into it because it really jumps out. When I saw it, I said, okay, this is pretty genius because it has the video cassette, but also in the, the title and the name of the author, it really looks like this stamp, as you said, that you put on the old video cassette. So I think that was quite interesting. It totally drew me in, and I think that's the most important thing to make the audience want to, because this is quite different from anything I've ever seen. And
Oh, right.
I
Thank
think
you.
it's really nice the fact that you imagine the tape coming out. I would have never thought of that. It's quite interesting. I definitely found it really innovating. It's brilliant. I really like this one. Okay. So, and if you would pick one of your favorite covers that you've created, the one you're the most proud of, which one would you pick?
I think my favorite is when I did a cover for Lolita, and I like that because it's never been used on a book. It was never meant to be. It was like there's an architect who's based in California, and every 2 or 3 years he invites loads of different designers to come up with a cover for a particular book or a certain CD cover or something like that. And then he kind of exhibits them, or in this case, he produced a book around it. So it's never been used on a book, which I quite like in a way. And I'm not really sure where the kind of idea came from. It just sort of appeared, and there's very little to it. So that I try and avoid kind of style things because they kind of anything that's stylish now is not going to be in a year or two. And with especially with book covers where you're working 9 months before it comes out, if you're too kind of trendy, all you're really doing is kind of building in this obsolescence to what you're doing. So it's really nice to create these kind of timeless like objects in a way that keep away from that. And this cover is so kind of simple, it's literally kind of Lolita and Nabokov and a simple image, and it all came together quite nicely. And so I think that's my favorite. But generally it's always whatever I'm kind of working on next, rather than sort of once I've done a cover, I tend to kind of almost forget about it, because I'm more interested in what I'm going to do like tomorrow than what I did like a year ago or something. Quite often it's strange, but obviously a book cover to everyone else in the world is this final thing that looks nice or rubbish or in between. But as a designer, you have a different feel because you might have gone through lots of stages to get to it, or it might not be what you had in mind. So I think when I see a cover, I see a different thing to what everyone sees with that cover. And quite often by the time it comes out, you just kind of fed up with it. I'm far more interested in kind of sort of thinking, what shall I do next, rather than kind of thinking, oh, that was great. Or yeah, I mean, I quite like Lolita and things like Metamorphosis. I really liked doing that. I like things where I get to kind of play around a bit. I'm very lucky in the things that people are getting to work on. I don't generally work on big successful books because I don't have the kind of design that would help sort of sell those, multi-million kind of, print runs. But, so I'm lucky that I get to work on things that kind of suit, my kind of outlook and style and things, but they may not sell many, but they kind of make me happy. So, it's a good match.
Yeah. Well, for example, The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot and Kafka's Metamorphosis. These are really famous classics.
They are, yeah.
It might be really exciting to see, your cover, or well, your creation of the cover being, handled on to many people, because I think these are books that will be studied over and over. So I think it's quite nice to refresh the image of authors that are already dead, and I think that's really nice.
I mean, the interesting thing about working on a classic is that if, say, a book called 1984 by someone that nobody had ever heard of, called George Orwell, that came out like next week, and I had to design the cover, that would be a completely different job to designing, you know, what is 1984. When you're working on a classic, you've got all those existing ideas. Everyone pretty much knows what that book is about. So you can kind of use people's existing ideas and kind of like play around with it a bit, or kind of shock them, or you don't have to kind of say, this is the book about this or that. You can already get past that bit and kind of, and play around with people's existing ideas a bit in a way, and kind of shock them or disturb them or make them think, you know, what the hell's all that about? And that's what's great about classics, you know, taking those, people all have a fixed idea of what 1984 should look like, and you can kind of like change that, or, you know, for any classic, that's the nice thing about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great, because it even draws other types of audience, you know. I think because normally we would associate these things as very old and ancient, something that we no longer desire to read. And this really makes us come back to those stories. I think the remaking of covers of old classics, I think it's quite interesting, because it's kind of a renewal, let's say, of these books.
Yeah, it is.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so, and what advice would you give to people who would like to start their careers as cover designers?
Well, going back to classics, that's what I always say to cover designers. I always say, if you want to get into cover design, choose 4 or 5 books that people don't choose books that are too obvious, but choose books that people are slightly aware of, because then they can look at your cover, and if they know what the book's about, they can see that you've done something that's kind of suitable, if that makes sense. If they design a cover for a book that no one's ever heard of, it's harder for a person to sort of think, well, I don't know, this cover looks nice, but I don't know if it's suitable, or what you've done is really clever, or so if you imagine, if you approach publishers and you've got 4 or 5 covers and you've done, you know, kind of Wuthering Heights or A Clockwork Orange, or, you know, titles like that, and you've not only managed to give it a good cover, but you've done something that no one's really done on that cover before, and it's really, it's kind of appealing, and it's really well designed, and it's clever, and they can see that you're working on lots of different levels, and that you're kind of, you know, you can do that job. It used to be the case, I do a little bit of teaching, and it used to be the case that students, when it came to doing a book cover, they'd make a really nice image. Quite often it'd be like a pencil drawing or a photograph or something, and then they'd just sort of stick some type on top of it. And the image and the type were 2 different things. And it seems now as though, you know, we've got past that, so that, you know, this thing I've got of image and type working together and stuff, it seems like students are sort of taking that on board more and creating like a kind of complete package. I think that my advice would be, like, do 4 or 5 covers that you're really proud of, and then just be a bit cheeky. When I was trying to sort of get in work for book cover designers and do a bit of music stuff as well, I just ring people up, work I kind of really liked and people I admired, and just be a bit cheeky. Just say, I really like your work. I think that's always a good way to start, because people like being flattered, don't they? You're not going to get 5 people up and say, I think your work's terrible. So you ring up and say, I really like your work. I wonder if I could come and show you my work sometime. And that's what I used to do. And they'd sort of say, there are no jobs going. And I'd say, that's fine. I'd like to see what you think of my work anyway. I won't take long. I just want to show you my stuff. And say, they may say, no, go away, get lost. And if they do, then fair enough. And if they say, yeah, come in, that's great. And quite often you get in there, and sometimes people sort of say, well, we don't have any jobs going here, but a friend of mine had a job going a couple of weeks ago. I wonder if he'd be interested, or have you gone to see so-and-so, or you should definitely go and show your work to a friend of mine. And you kind of, you know, you never know. It could be a day later or a week later or 2 years later that because of that conversation,
right, you
bump into them somewhere and something happens, or it's like a lot of things. It's like,
creating like a network.
Yeah. And it's like any part of design. It's like coming up with an idea. You don't get an idea from sort of sitting at a table with a pencil and paper thinking, right, I need to come up with a really good idea now. You get an idea from going out and doing something and bumping into people and talking to other people. One thing I really liked about having a studio is that at lunchtime you'd sort of say, I'm working on something and I've got this idea and it's this, this and this. And someone would say, well, that sounds good, but you could maybe change that part to this, or just, it's when you start scribbling or talking about things or that's how it evolves. You know, things don't evolve by being stuck in a kind of jam jar, or, you know, they evolve by being pushed around and being, you know, forced to adapt, don't they? So I think that's what you've got to do. That's how you've got to find, you know, I encourage people to go to talks as well. I think if you go to talks, you meet other people and, you know, they say, try this or speak to that person, and you never know where it ends up. It's like, you need to, you know, that's one of the terrible things about COVID, is that everyone sitting on the table at home it's not good for people. It's good to bump into other people and you have these strange conversations, or you know, even on your journey to and from work, you see something out of the corner of your eye that looks like something else, and that makes you think of this, or, you know, that's how things work, isn't it? That's how you get ideas. You don't get ideas by saying, right, brain, come up with a great idea. You know, it doesn't work like that. So yeah, my advice would be go out and see things, go talk to people, show your work to people, and be a bit cheeky, because ultimately people can say, no, go away. And then you ring someone else and see if they'll look at your work, and do what you want to do. You know, don't copy other people's work, because that's pointless. And AI is going to make it even more pointless.
Yeah.
yeah. Don't get into that conversation. But, you know, try and find, it's a horrible word, but it's like, you know, your kind of like your take on things, or like your voice or your view of things, you know, try and get your kind of signature out there and it show why someone should employ you rather than other people. You know, you've got to give people a reason to sort of, and also be nice and be funny, you know, I always think I'd rather sit next to someone who's maybe not the greatest designer in the world, but they're funny, rather than someone who's, they may be amazing designers, but they're really rude, or, you know, yeah.
Because then it's harder to break into the industry, because
exactly, yeah.
And little by little you get to know these people who might, you know, push you to the right path. And I think that you really have to go out there, talk to people. That's really interesting. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I totally agree with you. I'm glad that nowadays it's not as bad as when it was with COVID. So it's good that we're back to it. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to start, especially in this publishing industry, which could be really hard to get in. So
it can't. Cover designers, you know, almost without fail, I generally like really nice people, very friendly, very like helpful. It's not like a lot of business I imagine that are ultra competitive or secretive. People are generally like want to help if they can. So, you know, that can only be a good thing as well.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah. And just before we finish this talk, in which platforms can we follow you? Like, do you have a website or any social media?
Yeah, I've got a website, so that's keenandesign.com, and I'm also on Instagram and a little bit on Twitter, but not so much these days. So mostly on Instagram, really. That's where I occasionally post sort of new work and things, and that's about it, really. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, that was pretty interesting. I'm really, really fascinated by everything that we've elucidated during this call. It's fantastic, because I've personally never really seen the behind the curtain, what's going on in the actual making of the cover. We just see all of them in the bookshops, and we're like, they look so pretty, but it takes work to go up to that, to have the final product. So I always found it really interesting. Yeah.
That's kind of true of any job, though, isn't it? All you see is the end result, and most jobs are really interesting once you find out what, you know, and it's easy to take things for granted, isn't it? And just think, they just turn up. And it's amazing to find out how all of these things are made, or, you know, come about, or,
And thank you so much for taking your time for this interview. That was wonderful.
I've enjoyed it. It's been great. Yeah.
Thank you. You too. And good luck for your future projects.
Thank you. I need it.
Covers. That's brilliant.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Poetry Lighthouse. If you liked this episode, don't forget to share and subscribe to our podcast. You can also visit our website, thepoetrylighthouse.com, where you can read and submit your works of poetry and short stories. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram to keep updated. This is the end of the episode. Thanks again, and see you next time.